Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Castonguay. I'm the Executive Director of the Ipswich River Watershed Association. I am really excited about tonight's program. We're trying a novel approach here with a simulcast. I'm here at the True North viewing party with several people here, and welcome everybody on Zoom. Tonight's program is entitled Tale of Two Dams. And just a little background on that title. We here at Ipswich River have been working for many years with the town of Ipswich on the Ipswich Mills Dam, and assessing its feasibility for potential removal. At the same time, the town of Exeter has been involved in a very similar project, and we like to call it our sister project just up the coast in Exeter, where the situations are almost identical in every way, which you'll hear about tonight. So tonight, I'm really thrilled to announce our two speakers, Kristen Murphy, who's Natural Resource Planner for the town of Exeter, who's going to tell us all about her project up the coast, who have completed that project. And then we'll hear from Shea, who's Restoration Program Director for Ipswich River Watershed, to give folks an update on the Ipswich Mills Dam removal project. And then we'll have some question and answer. And procedurally, we'll probably take questions for Kristen after her presentation and then turn it over to Neil. Unfortunately, our third speaker for the night, Amy Singler, who's Restoration Director for American Rivers, which is our nation's leading river advocacy organization, just called in sick. So we won't be able to hear from Amy tonight. Amy was going to talk about the Ipswich River. As many of you have heard, American Rivers has designated the Ipswich Mills Dam as one of the leading rivers projects in the country to watch this year. And you'll hear a little bit from Neil why we got that designation. So without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Kristen, who will talk to us about Exeter. Kristen.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now that I know that there's a brewing company version of this, I feel like Ipswich is going to be the next one to be like, hold my beer, Exeter, and you'll go do your dam removal. I am super excited to come here tonight and talk about our dam removal process in Exeter. I'm going to share my slides so that you don't have to look at my face all night. And let's see. Of course, I'm at the end of it. Bear with me. There we go. Okay, do you all, whoops. Oh, I'm giving it all away. Do you all see my slides? Thumbs up? Yes. Neil, is that thumbs up?
It hasn't gotten into presentation mode yet, at least on my screen.
Uh-oh. How about now?
Not quite yet. It looks like it's just still showing your slide overview.
When you selected share screen, which window did you select? Because sometimes if you go full screen, it makes it a separate window.
Let's try again. How about that?
Click on slideshow.
Yeah, if you click that bottom right button.
It is. I did. There's just some kind of delay.
You know what? I'll pull it up. I'll pull them up on mine.
Perfect.
We'll do that.
We just tested it.
Okay, let's see. Sorry, apologies for this delay. Let's see. Okay, now I'm having difficulties, so bear with me. Okay, here we go. Hopefully this works.
Great. Yay, I see it. Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone. You'll notice my title is different. I just switched, I expanded my job position and now I'm full-time and they give me a different title. So no longer natural resource planner, but conservation and sustainability planner. You can go to the next slide. So for those who aren't familiar, Exeter is in the southeast part of New Hampshire within the county of Rockingham. You can go to the next slide. And our dam it was a head of tide dam. It sat at the end of the Squamscott River, a tidal river that flows out to Great Bay, through Little Bay, the Piscataqua River, Little Harbor, and then out to the Atlantic Ocean through the Gulf of Maine. So that's just a little orientation slide. You can keep going. So our Great Dam, which is in the center of this picture, or was in the center of this picture, is in the center of our downtown Exeter. You can see the river in the middle of the image there, and it's surrounded by both residential and commercial businesses, and is literally the center of our downtown. If you're familiar with Exeter at all, that's Water Street on the top part of the screen, and 108 comes in from the upper left corner of your screen. So our dam was all connected, even though not physically, but was connected to the Exeter Mills. So the Exeter Mills are located in the bottom center of your screen. And if you go to the next slide, we had an area called the penstock. It's hard to do without a pointer, but if you can see the wooden structure straight ahead off to the right, that's in the middle of the river, that directly connects water from the Exeter River to the right there. Oh, thanks for the pointer. Perfect. A little bit more to the right, but yes. That directly connects to the Exeter Mills, and you can see the stack in the back. That's where the Exeter Mills are. And water would come from the Exeter River out to the mills so that they could use it. The mills now are a residential property, and they were using the Exeter Squamscott River for cooling. And so that was something that we needed to untangle in this process. You can go to the next slide. All right, so there's a lot of dates on here and none of that really matters. What I just want to call your attention to is in 1981, the town of Exeter took ownership of the dam. And in 2000, we were issued a letter of deficiency from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Dam Safety Bureau. Our high hazard dam was not structurally sufficient to be able to pass an appropriate storm event. And so we knew we had to do something about it, but there was no requirement for us to consider removal. And about that time, the town of Exeter Select Board created a volunteer board called the River Study Committee. And I talk about this group because I think that they're really integral part of how our process was a success. This volunteer stakeholder group included people who lived along the river's edge. It had representation from Phillips Exeter Academy, who live adjacent to the river and within the impoundment area of the river. It had residents who also serve on our Conservation Commission. There was just a whole diverse group of stakeholders there. And so this group brought a very diverse variety of opinions to the table. So some time passed, we received an amendment to our letter of deficiency. And then we conducted some other studies. Then Mother's Day and Patriots Day flood hit. And as you know, those were pretty significant storm events. And it got people really kind of thinking and worrying about, we had 200-year storm events in, basically a year and a half period. So what does that mean for Exeter? I'm kind of worried about flooding. And so it was a tangible flooding situation that was on everyone's mindset. So add some more studies in there. And then it just in 2010, we were really exploring what our alternatives were, because now we're on our second letter of deficiency amendment, and pressure was building. We needed to make a decision for what we were going to do. And at that time, a member of the Conservation Commission, Peter Richardson, said, hey, maybe I don't see that we've considered all alternatives here. What about the alternative of removing the dam? And everyone thought, okay. And then our wonderful partners from DES and New Hampshire Fish and Game and NOAA all came and gave us presentations on what does dam removal mean? How does the permit process work? And so the town of Exeter kind of had a flavor for what that would look like. So it was at that point that we sent out a request for proposals for a dam removal feasibility study or an alternatives analysis. So you can go to the next slide. And so that process looks like, I'm sure, similar to what your process looked like. There were public outreach events, but at every event, the River Study Committee was an integral part of the a face of the committee. And so, for example, draft versions of the report were reviewed by members of the committee, and through that process, they became very familiar with the different components of the study and could speak to their friends about it. We had an input session where we had tables set up around Exeter's town hall, and residents could come and share photos of their youth along the river or flooding events in their backyard. You could go and visit and talk to somebody who would talk about the historical concepts related to dam removal. And so people could walk around to these different areas of interest and talk to an expert in that topic from the consulting team, but also next to them, partnered with them, was a member of the River Study Committee. And so as the public started to hear about dam removal, they also heard about it from the voices of their peers. It wasn't just a consulting firm. It wasn't just town staff. It was this volunteer board. And members of the volunteer board realized pretty quickly that, and I'm sure you've realized this too, dam removal requires some pretty intense vocabulary, right? And so it's a complicated process. There's a lot of heavy information in there. And so in addition to the required outreach through the consultation process that we needed to go through, members of the River Study Committee also held some additional sessions. They held a fireside chat where people could come down and talk about any questions they had. A riverside walk where people learned about, penstock, what does that mean? Or impoundment, what does impoundment mean? They created an email address so people could type in their questions. And town staff, myself included, had an open door policy. We, on any given moment, anyone could walk in, mad or curious or whatever, and ask questions about dam removal and what the study contained. And I think that was a really important process because we came at it from let's listen, let's share information, but at no time during this process did the River Study Committee decide that they were pro dam removal or any alternative. They were simply learning what those alternatives were and understanding those and conveying them to the public. I think next slide. Yeah, so with our open door policy, one of the most common questions that we had was, what's the river going to look like? Is it going to be a big muddy mess? And, the answers were, this is a rendering. You could see what it looked like. And yeah, there will be times when it will be a big muddy mess right after removal. And so right about this time, I believe it was, let's see, we learned that, you saw all of the different studies that were out there, and we learned about a grant opportunity related to the Sandy grant, thanks to Eric, who's on this call here. And so that really initiated, so the Sandy grant was only available if you were considering removal. And so, so it really provided the River Study Committee an opportunity to say, all right, we need to take a position. We have all the alternatives in front of us. We need to take a stand. And I will never forget, and there was hemming and hawing there, you know, even still with all the information, the heaviness of this decision was on us. And so Don Clement, bless his heart, came in with this, you know, 3-foot tall stack of documents, and he laid them down on the table one by one. You know, 2004, 2006, 2007, and the stack grew higher and higher and eventually toppled onto the floor. And he was like, we've studied all we can study. It's time to make a decision. And so Don also happened to be chair of the select board at that time. And what we realized was we needed a letter of support from the select board. So throughout this process, the feasibility study had been presented to the select board several times. The public had chances to come up and ask questions. The select board clearly wasn't settling on an alternative. And so again, Don, in his chairmanship, sat there and said, okay, you know, we need to make a decision. And so he said, I move to endorse the dam removal and sign a letter of support for the grant application. And there was dead silence, like the uncomfortable dead silence that you have that lasts way longer than you expect. And I don't remember who it was, but someone had said, well, I'll second that for discussion purposes. And we all know what that means, right? So sure enough, next slide, please. At that meeting, the select board did not vote in support of dam removal. And shortly thereafter, two characters, I'll call them, from town who had a history of being characters in town and often on opposing sides, opposing points of view, got together and crafted a citizen's petition and went around town gathering signatures to get a warrant article on the ballot in March for voters to themselves make this decision if the town should remove the dam. And so you can just click to the next slide. So sure enough, they had more than enough signatures. We needed 25 signatures for a citizen's petition to make it to the ballot. They had 483 signatures. And so you can go to the next slide. And so we all waited with great anticipation for March. I don't live in Exeter, I lived in Dover, but you know, we had an email chain planned out so we get notified when the votes were counted, and Dawn and Pete were there listening to the numbers. And because it was a financial vote, it needed to be passed by 3/5 margin. And sure enough, the voters supported dam removal. Right? So then the real work happens. We know we're removing the dam. So it was working with our partners to secure funding and figuring out how to patch all the pieces together, start the consultation process. And so, you know, we got it that far, and then the work began. Next slide, please. And I want to get the date right because, and I'm terrible with dates. So I think it was, on July 1st, this was now 2014. Keep in mind the RFP went out in 2011 for the feasibility study. So some time has passed. But on July 1st, 2016, the drawdown of the river began and the contractor was staged and poised to start the removal process. Next slide. It was messy, it was noisy, it was dusty. It's right in our downtown, mind you, right? All of those businesses you see on the left side of the screen, they all heard the clank, 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 clank of the, you know, of the dam being broken up. And it's next slide. And as more and more work continued, the weather got hotter and drier. Next slide. And it was very, very dry. And it looked kind of crazy, right? And so we can, yeah, I'll answer that in a minute. And so it looked kind of crazy. Not only was it dry downstream, but upstream as well. It was that muddy, mucky mess that, you know, we knew would happen. We just didn't really expect it to quite look like this. And I would not be telling the truth if I said this didn't cause us to take pause. You know, there were moments we looked at this and we're like, oh gosh, I really hope we made the right decision. So next slide. Yet still we went ahead with the dam removal was completed, and we went ahead with a ceremony to celebrate the restoration. It was a massive feat. It was a very, very hot day. We had so many partners helping us through this process. Yes. So many partners helping us through this process. And so we had speeches from a number of people. It was an emotional day in a really good and hopeful way, but also kind of a sad day. And I will say that one presentation really got to me that day. And it was the director of the Exeter Historic Society. And she made a speech, the kind of speech that when you hear it, you're covered in goosebumps despite the heat, right? It was incredible. So I'm going to read you a part of that speech. Next slide, please. And to me, this really captures the emotions that we were having. She said, 100 years from now, people will stand on this riverbank watching the water and know that once we put the river to work and then we set it free. She said, if you are lucky to have straddled that historic divide, to have remembered when the river was harnessed and then set free, you stand at a privileged point in time. Savor that. Comfort ourselves that our decision to remove the dam was reached with more discomfort than the decision to build the dam in the first place. And remember that it was the river that created Exeter and not the other way around. And it was such a beautiful speech. And so a few days went by, and then, you know, still hot as can be. And then all of a sudden the rains came. Next slide. And sure enough, we had water in our river. We had a natural flowing river. I absolutely love this picture because everyone flocked to downtown when the rains came. Everyone wanted to see what it looked like. And this guy, I can't see his, let's see. I can't see the credit right now because I have the names of participants in the way, but you can see the photo credit. This guy went out and they were so excited to be the first to paddle the river, right? So off they go. They're kayaking downstream, and it was fantastic. And what a great way to celebrate this phenomenal change. But let's see, one more slide, I think. Yeah, so the river became even stronger. And now we get excited to see the river change with seasons. It's incredible to see the change over time, but it's not just recognizing the visual change. There have also been dramatic environmental impacts or benefits, I should say. And none of them more exciting, at least to me, and I might be a little bit biased with my biology background, but none more exciting than the return of the alewives. Next slide, please. So for those who don't know, alewives are river herring, right? And what they do, they're called an anadromous fish. And so they spend most of their life out in the ocean. And when they're ready to lay eggs, they swim up these tidal rivers up into freshwater systems, lay their eggs, and then the young hatch and then swim out to sea. So here's a few pictures of, and when they come, I should tell you, when they come in droves, right? And so next slide, please. So it had been, this is again looking at our dam. And if you see the back edge there, you see the cement sloping structure. That was our fish ladder. And so river herring would come and gather in this at the the lower falls section there, they would be there by the thousands. And fish would swim up the fish ladder, and our fish ladder was closed. The gate was closed, so New Hampshire Fish and Game would go down. They'd be able to count exactly how many fish made it up the ladder and then move them over into the freshwater system. They would, on a daily basis, sometimes a couple times a day. So sure enough, they had a pretty decent knowledge of how many fish would make it up the ladder. And it, compared to what they were seeing accumulating downstream of the fish ladder, not many were making it up. The fish ladder was designed and redesigned a couple different times, tweaked here and there, but it really didn't trigger much improvements. And so, so that's a quandary, right? Like there's a visible indicator that the fish ladder is not working. Another reason why dam removal was important. And so, you know, some years they'd have like 2,000 fish make it over the fish ladder. Some years none. And I think the tail is the highest number was about 8,000 fish that would pass over into the fresh water. Compared to what was downstream, that's nothing. And so, so you can go to the next slide, please. So it's a little bit difficult to see in this picture, but with the dam removed, so this is the free-flowing river again, you can see that wooden structure up at the top. That was that initial penstock area that I talked about that was connected to the mills. But nothing was more exciting than seeing the alewives make it up. So this is upstream of where the dam was, right? Because the penstock is where the dam was on the river. So this is upstream of where the dam was, and they're moving upward into the fresh river on their own. Next slide, please. And when I say they come in droves, I mean droves, like massive, massive amounts of these fish. And you know, it's exciting for the birds because there's this whole new food source. It's exciting for people because they're sitting in the restaurants and seeing all this activity out there. It's just fantastic. And so removing, so I should say, now that the fish ladder is gone, it's a little harder to count fish, right? Because we don't have a spot to count them at. But Fish and Game and others had stood on Great Bridge, and they upped their counts. I think they were doing it 3 times a day or something like that. And in 2021, right, so last year, over 100,000 herring made it past Great Bridge, which is fantastic. We were seeing them at Pickpocket Dam, which is the next dam further upstream. We were seeing them in the Little River. And it was fantastic to know that we were a part of this process, right? Like this is nature doing nature stuff. And all we did was needed to undo what we had put in place. And so, so removing this dam reopened 21 miles of the Exeter Squamscott River for these anadromous fish. And I will say, I hope that this comes with some reassurance. The community has really come around to support it. Even like, you know, those open door policies where you could come into my office and talk and share all your frustrations about the process and all your questions. Even those people come up to me today and they're like, this is fantastic. I think you can do the next slide. Oh, it's just another one of the fish. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic to see this turn in people. Yeah, there are still, I work with a coworker who's still like, you know, someday we'll regret it. But by far, the majority of people we speak to are celebrating the fact that the dam is gone. So we've had a dam-free festival the year the dam was gone. We've had Alewife film festivals. And then this year, we're bringing back an event that used to occur in Exeter quite a bit, but has skipped several years. I've never personally attended it, and it was my mission to bring it back. So this year, we're bringing back the Alewife Festival, which will be a celebration downtown, kind of like an environmental fair, but we're doing fun stuff like guess the alewife run date, similar to like guessing ice out in Lake Winnipesaukee. So for $10, you can put your guess in and win your chance at a kayak. We're offering kayak tours and all sorts of other stuff. And so it's really just become this celebration. And it would be a rare sight to drive through Exeter and not see someone either at Founders Park or at Great Bridge just taking in what this river is today. And it's incredible and it's rewarding. It's a tough process, but it's 100% worth it. At least it was in our experience. So that's all I have to share, and I'm happy to stick around for questions.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I got secondhand goosebumps listening to that. But yeah, we got time for a few questions. If folks in the Zoom either want to raise their hand, virtual hand, or if anyone at True North has got anything, we got a minute or two, and then we got to move on. But
Can you stop the screen share so I can see?
yes, yep. So let's see. We had one question in the chat that says, how much did this affect the upstream water table? As much as if you're able to answer that or not, I don't know.
Yeah, so we did, so Exeter had, we get our water both from surface water and from groundwater. And we did need to lower the intake for one of our upstream wells. It was the intake off the river. Not upstream wells, the water intake in the river. We did need to lower that, and we do receive water at two wells up in the Skinner Springs, and I forget the other one, but we've not seen any negative impacts from that.
Let's see, Deborah, you have a question? All right, let me, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Great presentation. Kristen, you mentioned your coworker said that you would regret it in the future, perhaps. Can you talk about why he or she made that prediction? And also restoration work. Was there a lot of habitat restoration in the downtown area and in conjunction with the removal? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So great question. So, I mean, I say that half joking. It's partly because he's a curmudgeon. He's grown up in Exeter and he and I have that kind of relationship. But I think he feels like someday we might worry with water levels lower or during drought situations that we won't have access to that water. And then in terms of restoration, there's actually, so we didn't do any dramatic restoration. There wasn't shrub planting or anything, but we did have seed mix that we spread on the riverbank, and it was a fantastic way. Good old Yankee ingenuity. Two guys from Public Works in a kayak retrofitted a leaf blower. So they dumped the seed in the top and it blew it on the banks as they paddled downstream. It's great.
Let's see, Ken, you have a question over it, or Lindsay, go ahead.
Someone else asked this too, but what was involved with drawing the water level down before taking down the dam started?
Yeah, so all they had to do was open up the floodgates, right? And the water levels went down.
Okay.
And then during construction, they did need to, in the beginning, they did need to, I know someone from Simcoe is here, so maybe they're better able to, yeah, do you want to explain how that worked?
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty involved water control plan that was part of the plans for the project. And what ended up happening is we drew it down, and then we had, I think Eric commented in the chat there that near record drought. So at one point with the water intakes upstream, I think the Exeter River was actually flowing backwards. So what we ended up doing was significantly decreasing the scale of that and issuing a credit, really working with the town to reduce the cost of the overall project. And but that it was just some 3-foot tall super sandbags to divert what little flow was coming there to keep it out of the work area and maintain everything. But it was as we tend to say, whatever the weather is, it helps us one place and hurts us someplace else. So it was a tough year to keep plants alive in Boston, but it was a great year to take out a dam in Exeter.
Ken, live from True North, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Kristen, thank you. So I thought I heard you refer to the.
All right, we should be fine.
Okay, let's try this again. Kristen, I thought I heard you refer to the Pickpocket Dam. And I'm gathering that's a bit upstream. And if I heard you right, can you talk a little bit about what the status of that dam is?
Yeah, so Pickpocket Dam is also, we do have a letter of deficiency for Pickpocket. And so we're in the middle of deciding our next steps.
Great. So I think we're running close to our allotted time for questions here, but I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the chat, and this chat will be saved.
Another question. That's crazy.
We're getting a lot of feedback there, Rachel.
Some feedback there. Okay.
All right, one more question.
Thank you. Eric Crothwell from Ipswich. Two questions. Just, did I hear you correctly? The removal of the Great Dam freed up 21 miles of river?
Yeah, I think that's from the mouth of the Atlantic to the head of tide in Exeter.
Okay. And the other question was, you indicated that only about 3,000, 2,000 alewife would make it over the fish ladder, and that was a fraction of the number of alewife that were somewhere in the river. Do you have an idea of how many alewife were around before that?
So I don't know that they ever counted what was not making it upstream through the fish ladder, but they could clearly tell that there were gatherings of fish outside of the fish ladder on the downstream side that weren't making it upstream. I suspect similar numbers to what we see now.
Thank you.
All right. I apologize if more folks have questions, but feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll be reading the chat, and I can get back to everybody who has a question that wasn't answered. But fortunately, I just got news over the wire that Amy Singler is here and present, and despite us announcing that she wasn't going to be able to make it, she's rallying, she's hardcore, and this is how much she cares about this stuff. So we're going to hear from her even just a minute or two. Amy, whatever you got is great, and we appreciate you being here. Again, this is Amy Singler, Director of River Restoration for American Rivers.
Yeah, hi everyone. Is this working? Great. So I saw, Kristen, your presentation was so fantastic. It's hard to build much on that. But I think what I'll do really, in just a few minutes, is just to give a sense of the scope and scale. I know there's a lot of really well-informed folks in the room, virtual and physical room, as far as this work goes. But just a sense of dam removal and sort of why this is all happening, and just really the broad scale benefits that we see with these projects. American Rivers is the organization that tracks dam removals nationally, and with thanks to our partners that help us compile that data. There's a lot happening. Let's see if I can get this. It often takes a second. There we go. There are over 2 million dams in this country, and many of them look a lot like the outdated structures that we have here in New England. And really what's happening is that as you all well know, as dams are well past their useful life, or maybe are deemed to not be needed anymore, dam owners are deciding to make different decisions about what they do with these structures. Even with dams in place, whether they have passage, regardless of their condition, they still really have impacts on our communities and on our river ecology. But with dam removal, we're able to really restore our rivers. And I think this is the thing, Kristen really touched on this, that we're able to, I think, Kristen, what you said is nature is doing nature stuff when we take when we take these dams out. I'm going to use that quote from now on. But really, when we remove a dam, we're able to remove the stressor of that river that's on that river. And so if we're having water quality impacts, if we're having fish passage impacts, we don't have to sort of play the game of how do we manage for all those impacts? How do we manage for the safety impact? Because when we remove the dam, we're able to restore fish passage, we're able to restore river processes, we see improvements to water quality, and we see a really sustainable and dynamic river ecosystem that is restored to that place. And to quote another colleague, what's good for the fish is good for us and it's good for our budget. We're really, you know, the more often that communities are choosing dam removal, we're seeing the benefits. We talk about multi-benefit projects increasingly now, but you no longer have the maintenance and the flooding concern. We see the environmental improvements for aquatic and terrestrial, and you've reduced that impact. It's better on municipal and town budgets. And in a lot of cases, we see new recreation. Maybe that's bending over the bridge and watching the Alewife come up and those Alewife festivals that we can now have, or in some cases, it can be improvements to actual kayaking or fishing or something like that. And so that's why, let's see, and as of 2021, there's been 1,800 dams removed in the United States, the vast majority of those in the last 20 years. And so I think just really the example out of Exeter is really just such a great example of the ways that these projects are moving forward and the kind of benefits that communities are seeing. Just a few pictures from around New England. You know, I'll say I've spent many times driving through the center of Ipswich on my way to or from Crane Beach, usually stopping for ice cream, admittedly, or maybe after an afternoon in Willowdale. And so, you know, I think it's a really nice parallel when you think about what you had in Exeter and the changes you saw and then the benefits you saw. You know, you have a place where the community can now gather to see that river restore, can see that process happening, can see those fish return. And I think, you know, sometimes these projects happen way up in the woods and nobody gets to see them and the fish get to benefit, and that's great. But in a lot of cases, there are opportunities for communities to really watch that river come back to life and to see those changes. And I really like the way that the historic commissioner said it in Exeter about just, you know, to see that change and to be a part of that change, I think is a really exciting opportunity. Certainly, and certainly one that you have. And, you know, at each of these projects, these represent a change. It is a change to our community. It is a change to the river. Hopefully we have enough examples out there that help kind of take away some of the questions. But I think it's a really exciting time. And certainly with all the other work that's happening on the Ipswich, thinking about projects up in South Middleton, and just all the good work that people have done over the years about water, to make sure that there's enough water and that water quality is good in the watershed. You know, you have a really important opportunity here. So just happy to provide that kind of bit of context, and happy to answer a question or two just about the projects in broad strokes.
Let's see. Well, thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it. If anyone can put dam removal projects into context, stepping outside our New England bubble too. I mean, it's great to hear about what's going on and the importance of these projects all over. So thanks again for being here.
Neil, I have a question from Dan.
All right, go ahead. I'll get my screen booted up in the
What is
meantime.
meant by flood resilience?
Well, by flood resilience depends a bit on the project, but a lot of these projects actually, they're at risk from failure during floods. And so by removing that hazard, you remove potential impacts, additional impacts during flooding. In the case of some projects, we also are able to increase the amount of water storage within the upstream area because the impoundment is not there. So either one of those situations is typically what we're thinking of when we're thinking of flood resilience.
Great. Thank you, Amy. All right, well, we'll move along here because I don't want to go too late into the night, but I do want to get to the second dam in our tale of two dams here. And first want to
Sorry,
thank.
Neil, one more question. I put it in the
Okay.
chat, but I wasn't sure you saw it. As far as municipalities go, what are the savings as far as flood insurance and loss of liability?
So this is Kristen. I don't know that I'm the best to. I will say that in Exeter, after the dam was removed, we did need to submit a letter of map revision because the floodplain or the flood zone was modified. But because at the same time we were going from less accurate elevation data to more accurate elevation data, some properties went in to the floodplain and some went out. So I wouldn't say that there was a dramatic reduction in terms of properties within the FEMA flood zone. And I really can't speak to, we really haven't had any massive storm events since then to know, to realize any differences that we may see. In Exeter, Great Bridge actually acts as an additional constriction during flood. And so while we do see an improvement for lower storm events, those larger massive storm events are likely to still trigger some flooding because the abutments to the bridge form a partial impoundment.
All right. Thank you, Kristen, for that. And thanks in general for that great presentation on Exeter. Really learned a lot, and it's just still boggles my mind to hear how similar it is to the Ipswich Mills project. And so I want to thank everyone for attending tonight and everyone over at True North and everyone virtually too. Really appreciate everyone's interest in this project, and it's really because of you all why we can continue to keep this projects like this going. So I want to give a little bit of updates and recent news on the project. And that's
can anyone comment on the difficulty of getting the federal and state approvals for dam removal? I haven't heard anything about that.
How about I'll if we save that for the end here, we'll get to that. We'll have some time at the end. I just kind of want to get through talking about the updates, and then we'll have some time after that. So we'll get into it here a little bit, but we definitely have time for questions after following. So, all right, just want to give a quick shout out to some of our project partners here. This is not an exhaustive list, but a lot of our partners that are currently working with us in our current scope here. And so just a brief outline of what we're going to be getting into tonight. I'm going to give some super brief background because I know a lot of you are already familiar with where this project is at. But for those of you, it'll be a little bit of a refresher. Then most importantly, some updates, including updates on the feasibility study and what we're currently working on. We'll get into what's next, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. So super brief background. There's a lot of history on this project, and a lot of work has been done to date in order to characterize and assess every facet of dam removal. Kind of like Kristen said, leading up to that, the kind of that process of the timeline of how this has been working. We had our very initial reconnaissance and assessment of all the Ipswich River dams, so Ipswich Mills and South Middleton included, way back in 2006. 2014 is really when we started the pre-feasibility study. So it was kind of the initial analysis of flooding impacts, alternatives analysis like Amy talked, or like Kristen talked about, and impacts to the EBSCO Foundation. Those were all identified as big things to take a look at right from the get-go. 2014 also saw bathymetrics survey done. And then from 2015 to 2019 is really the period when the full feasibility study was ongoing and completed. And so it's a pretty exhaustive document. It's available online if folks haven't seen it or aware, but it's got tons of great information in there. If you like data, graphs, figures, pictures, it's got it all. So most recently, and what I'm going to talk about a little later, is some updates to that feasibility study. A little bit more background, and just to kind of put the Ipswich Mills Dam project into context, because I know a lot of times we can get into our own little bubble. But when we take a step back and look at this kind of region-wide, Ipswich Mills ranks in the 95th percentile for restoration value for all coastal dams from Maine to Virginia, which is pretty significant. When we talk about miles of habitat and ecosystem restored, that number is at 49 miles. That's what would become available if the dam were to be removed. The feasibility study, a lot of this stuff comes from a fact sheet that's available for folks as well, but pretty much we found that the study found that water levels above the dam will lower, but water levels below the dam will remain the same. And new water elevations would vary based on seasonal flows and daily tides. And dam removal would lead to a reduced flooding risk to buildings property upstream of the dam. And on the flip side, if the dam is left in place, you're talking about downstream infrastructure remaining at risk if the dam were to ever become damaged or fail in any way. It is an aging dam, and so as low of a possibility that is, it still remains a possibility with the dam in place. And so and then we're talking about all the classic benefits of dam removal. We have enhanced passage for fish, wildlife, and recreators. So for people to be able to travel by boat or however all the way from the ocean up to the river would be a pretty fantastic feat. So what we found was that after the feasibility study, there was a little bit more information necessary. So even with all that work done in the past 15 years, we're still identifying some gaps, and that's where the updates to the feasibility study come in. So I'll get into the weeds a little bit here, but I imagine some of you are interested in it. Hopefully that's why you're here, and hopefully maybe you'll learn a little something along the way. So one of the gaps was, how can we evaluate and predict groundwater and surface water levels in the vicinity of the dam and the EBSCO facility? And so primarily that question is, how can we establish a relationship between what the groundwater is doing and what the surface water is doing at the dam? And so one of our partners, Horsley Witten, installed some equipment that continuously monitored groundwater levels at the EBSCO facility. And they paired that with monitoring what the water levels were doing at the dam. And that was done by looking at just a physical stream gauge. And so they did all kinds of fancy math and pretty much were able to come up with correlations that showed, hey, we could look upstream at a river gauge that is already there. It's been there for a very long time. It's installed by USGS and maintained by them. It's continuous, meaning it's updated every 15 minutes. It constantly records data. And so we can use that gauge and directly correlate that to what the groundwater is doing at EBSCO and what the surface water is doing at the dam. And so why is this important? Why should anyone care? Essentially, these correlations can be used for the future planning and design level evaluation. So people who know more than me and know more than anybody about these things, the people who are going to be kind of approving these projects are going to want to know these things. And so that's why it was important for us to find out, how can we kind of predict what water levels are going to do in these areas. So the next gap was, what a lot of people think about when they think of dam removals, and that's, what's going to happen to the sediment behind the dam. And so some of this was covered in the initial feasibility study, but one of the gaps was, what's going to happen to the tributaries that are in this 1.5 mile zone of influence that extends from the dam upstream. And so that zone of influence kind of goes all the way up to the railroad bridge crossing that's upstream of our office here at Riverbend, so about 1.5 miles. And so, so this past summer, I was lucky enough to pilot a motorized riverboat recon mission up the Ipswich River, which was pretty wild with a few Horsley Witten scientists. And so we took sediment samples, surveyed some spots, all within this 1.5 mile area of influence. You can see some of the spots here on the map, extending from the dam in the area vicinity of EBSCO, all the way up past our office, up to that railroad bridge. So nobody sank, and we only got the harbor master called on us once. So I think it was a big win for that recon mission. And essentially, we were able to get a full picture of what's going on sediment-wise upstream of the dam. Some of the sites have a relatively high combination of sands and fine-grained materials, which is to be expected when you have many, many years of water being slowed by the dam within this 1.5 mile stretch. And then what they found is another kind of thing that you would expect is as they approached that upward extent of the 1.5 mile area of influence near the railroad bridge, we started to begin to see more sands and gravels and less of those fine sediments. And so essentially, if the dam were to be removed, the fine sediment area, a lot of the fines would slowly winnow out of the system now that you'd have slightly increased velocity in the area of the dam. And then you'd start to resemble that area around the railroad bridge where you have sands and gravels and a little bit more coarse material, like you would see in a typical flowing river. And lastly, a bigger gap that a lot of folks are reasonably concerned about and asking questions were how can we better understand the risks to the EBSCO facility? So many studies have been completed over the years related to the EBSCO building. They all provide valuable information as to how this old mill building may be affected by dam removal. So these previous studies kind of all highlighted one area of the Riverside building facility that needed some extra attention. And so EBSCO did not want us to go into the building and do any invasive work. So essentially they didn't want us to dig any pits in the area. So we weren't able to find out some key things that we would have been able to find out through that method. But what we were able to do was use ground penetrating radar, which essentially uses radar to paint a picture of what's going on underneath the surface. And so this is just a schematic of the EBSCO building, and that this red circle here is that area that is kind of the most at risk of potential settlement in the future. And so we really focused on this area. The geophysical experts focus on this area to try and determine what might happen in the scenario of dam removal. So I'm going to caveat all this with I am not a structural engineer, but I've learned a lot about it over the past year or so through this project. So if I say anything, wrong, please forgive me. But essentially, there's interior columns within the building of EBSCO that support the actual foundation of the building. And so the biggest question is, what are these columns mounted on? Are they mounted on concrete piers or are they mounted on wood pilings? And so if they're mounted on wood pilings, there's a risk that once those pilings are exposed to air, after being inundated with water for many, many years, that those wood pilings could be subject to drying and rot due to microbes. And so that's a problem in Boston. It happens a lot due to the groundwater levels and the groundwater table being close to some of the foundations. And so what our geophysical people were able to find out based on the GPR is that based on, we're still unable to say, so I guess the first conclusion is that we're still unable to say for sure if these columns are on wood or concrete. But based on the subsurface elevations of where the pilings are located and where the groundwater levels are as I discussed previously, they were able to do that correlation for the groundwater levels. Essentially, they found that these pilings, whatever they're made out of, whether it be concrete or wood, have been exposed multiple times over the history of the building. So essentially, some people smarter than I who worked in areas like this for a very long time say that that makes it very likely that the column supports are composed of concrete and not wood. And so, but we do not know for sure. And so we have to acknowledge that there's some uncertainty with the makeup of those piles. And so, so we know that even if there's a low level of risk to the columns and the structural integrity of the building, we wanted to look at options for mitigation for the building. So that's part of this current study. And so there's a slab foundation that supports the floor, so that it does not support the foundational structure of the building. And essentially, the geophysics folks said that that can be preemptively mitigated with compaction grouting. So, in the case of dam removal, some settlement is going to be expected. So that would be able to be preemptively mitigated by using some compaction grouting. And then the columns that support the actual foundation of the building can be monitored using a precision monitoring system that can detect tiny, minute movements. And so, and essentially, if movement was ever triggered via groundwater levels and surface water levels at the dam, at the X dam location after it would be removed, if those columns were subject to movement because of that, then that would trigger further mitigation. And so again, this is all kind of, to put this all in context, the extent of settlement is estimated to be a maximum of 1.5 inches. That's kind of what the geophysical folks found. So it's, we're not talking about, a huge amount of settlement, even in the worst case scenario. Okay, so that's a lot of structural stuff, but I want to make sure folks were aware if they're interested. And essentially what's going on now. We're looking into that mitigation work at EBSCO and refining costs, and we're going to be producing a report that will be reviewed by EBSCO and the town. And additionally, we're completing what we're calling pre-permitting work, such as wetland delineation and updating the designs and plans. And so this should all be complete by summer of 2022. And so it's essentially taking what's already been done in the feasibility study and just kind of refining it a little bit more. And so essentially what's next, so we finished compiling all that current work combined with all the previous work. And essentially we're providing the town with all the information they need to make a decision on removing the dam. And so ideally that positions the town to make a decision on removal this summer, 2022. We'll have, like Kristen said, that stack of materials has been piling up for Ipswich. And so it's definitely about to topple over. So hopefully we will have all the information that we'll need at that point. And so, and then there'll just be one question left to ask, and that's who's ready for a healthier, safer, free-flowing river. So hopefully that wasn't too rapid fire for everybody. I apologize, but I wanted to not get everyone out of here too super late and leave some time for questions. So with that, there's my contact information. Feel free to contact me anytime if you don't feel like asking a question in front of everybody, but we'll leave some time for some questions now. Folks want to raise their hand or just kind of chime in, that's more than fine. Someone said, do you get tired of damn jobs? Not yet, at least, but I'm sure they have a finite life. Deborah.
Yes, hi, thanks, Neil. Will the salinity of the water change near the EBSCO site enough, and if so, enough to create further challenges or threats to the infrastructure of the building is not a concern. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And that's a great question. And that is something that was looked at in the feasibility study by Horsley Witten. They set up some salinity monitors downstream of the dam and also used elevations upstream of the dam to try and project where that extent might go. And so essentially they think it's going to extend a little bit ways upstream, but with the dam being a head of tide dam, they essentially think it's not going to extend that far. And with you know, the differences in saltwater and freshwater, the densities, where one would sit on top of the other, they're not really expecting the saltwater to have a big effect on you know, structures upstream. So there will be some tidal mixing going on in there, but according to the feasibility study, they don't expect it to negatively impact anything upstream. So
Okay, we have a question here, Neil.
Hi, Eric Krathwell again. Thanks so much to Ipswich Watershed for all the good work they do. I have two questions. The Exeter presentation was very interesting in the way that they had involved the community from a you know, very early stage. I know that there have been periodic informational meetings and such, but is that something that you guys could do?
Wayne's going to answer.
okay, yep.
Yeah, we've been involved with the town for many, many years and have multiple meetings, but basically what the strategy from here out on, Eric, will be to basically ask the select board what they want for a public process, and we're willing and able to help the town and the community with those conversations. So there's been a series of meetings off and on, but at this point, we'll turn it over to the town and let the town community decide what they want for a process, and that can begin this summer, as Neil indicated.
Great, thanks. And the second part of that is the gentleman on the screen, Neil, I'm sorry, indicated that decision time is soon. Whose decision will it be?
The community.
So, I mean, it goes to a town vote, or?
Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Technically, the select board could likely decide, but as we saw in Exeter, it's more likely that the whole town will decide. I would predict that would be the process the select board would probably dictate. So it'll likely go to a future town meeting, but that is a speculation. Like all town infrastructure, the select board could make the call, but I suspect they'll turn it over to the citizenry.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, maybe just to put a finer point on that select board decision process. I'm just wondering, to the extent that there's some design options in terms of a full breach, partial breach, rock dam, maybe some other design considerations. When you say, quote, dam removal, I'm just curious to know what options might be on the table.
Yeah, it's a great question. And throughout the process, just like in Exeter, there were a series of alternative analyses that were undertaken for partial removal, rock ramp. All of those things were looked at. And it really was pretty clear that those intermediate options wouldn't provide any benefit, and they create additional problems. The so-called ledge, or what was historically called the upper falls that was speculated to be there, was determined to be deeper, lower down in elevation. So partial removal doesn't really gain much. Again, it's a pretty low head. It's a short dam, 5 to 6 feet. So those intermediate steps didn't seem to mitigate any of the concerns. So all those alternatives are still there to be looked at by the community. They didn't seem to have many advantages over complete removal.
Nat Pulsifer, Waldingfield Road. How far up, if the dam is removed, how far up will the tide go? And what are the consequences of a tide moving up the river towards the railroad bridge? Thank you.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on that. I think the tide, so essentially the tidal inundation study found that It would not reach all the way up to the railroad bridge. Essentially, we'd be talking, I want to say they projected maybe a couple 100 feet upstream or so. The tidal and it would be pretty minimal influence overall. They're not expecting like a tidal surge or anything like that to go upstream. So essentially the report said that they don't expect any negative effects on the ecosystem or on infrastructure due to the extended head of tide above the dam.
Thank you.
Sergio, you have had your hand raised. Let's see, Sergio.
Yeah. So what about the sea level rise? If sea level is rising half a meter, 1 meter in next decades?
So you're asking about sea level rise?
Yeah, then it's going to be more tides and more water, salt water coming in.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think incorporating sea level rise into the projections of the tidal projections is definitely important. I think there's probably some folks that might know a little bit more about it than me. I think as far as how that can impact in going above the dam, I can't really speak to that, but I think I want to make sure to give you an answer on that so we can definitely get back to you. Marlies.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Marlies Henderson from North Billerica, Talbot Dam. I have two questions. One is, in Ipswich, did you see a herring below the dam like Exeter did? And my second question is completely different. Do you want the second question too?
I'll answer the first one quickly. So yeah, we do have herring not only below the dam, but herring also access the fish ladder at Ipswich Mills Dam. We actually shout out to the fish counters, and we actually have a live stream on our website, and we have seen a number of herring already moving up this month, the Ipswich. So it's a small number compared to what it should be and other local rivers, but we're hoping that that's also something that could be positively impacted, like Kristen said, for Exeter. So there's definitely a herring population here.
Yeah. Yeah, in Billerica, we have a few very enthusiastic herring counters at Centennial Dam, except we counted 0 so far, and that's in Lowell. So we're still waiting for them to come up. And I think if they do, that would probably help the popularity of taking it down. And the other question is, there was a question about, is it a selectman vote or a community vote? But what if the dam is not owned by the community? So it's a private dam owner. Does the community still have such a strong voice?
Right. Yeah. So in this case, yeah, the town does own the dam, but in a case such as the South Middleton Dam, which is privately owned, they still want to work cooperatively with the town, but ultimately it is the dam owner's decision to take that dam down. And so since they're responsible for repairs and the upkeep, if they want to take it down, that's their decision, but they still have to go through the same permitting, the same avenues that a town would have to undertake as well. So
yeah. Thank you. Helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlies. And shout out to Eric in the chat who makes a great point, saying that equally important, there's lots of species that the fish ladder is not adequate for, and so such as rainbow smelt and shad as well cannot use some fish ladders. So we're excluding a lot of fish out there. So Dave. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Dave.
Thank you so much for your presentation and the Exeter person. That was fantastic. It seems like we should just get moving on this. My name is David Combe. I've been on the board for about 10 years. And so my question is really, has our organization done all the outreach work that we need to, to inform the public? It seems like Exeter was really bring the community, having them educated all along. So I'm wondering if we have done our work, and if there's plans to do more of that to really get started before the summer.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And like, I think I agree with Wayne. I think this being, we're the advocates for the project. We want to see it succeed. Ultimately, it's owned by the town, so we want to make sure that we're working with the town and doing kind of what they see as the right thing as well for outreach. So like, obviously up to this point, we've worked hand in hand. We'll continue to do that. And so I think over the next month or two, we'll definitely hoping to work with the select board, town staff, trying to figure out what is the best avenue. But I totally agree. I think something like Exeter's approach, where you can have like a meet the experts or a come ask us questions kind of thing going on. I think that's totally an avenue that we should go. I think that makes sense in this because there's always going to be questions. So
can we lead that, or do we have to wait till the town leads that?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely actively doing it as part of a couple of grants that we're working on with the town. And so, I think it'll just be an ongoing thing. And so it'll be changing over time. Like this meeting is kind of a step in that direction, but with it becoming nicer out, can we do some outdoor stuff? I think that's all stuff that can be in the hopper, and hopefully, there's essentially no reason why we wouldn't be able to do that. So.
Thank you.
Neil, I'll just add to that if anyone is familiar with Plymouth and their herring runs, they worked on a project with Northeastern University to draw people's awareness to trying to restore the herring runs there. And we are also going to be working on a project this fall with Northeastern University. So they will be doing installation and surveying project in downtown Ipswich during the Ipswich Illuminates. So that's their best chance at getting this project in front of a lot of people who are not self-selecting. So they're there just for the festivities and not necessarily there for fish restoration. And they collect this data to see if public arts can, in fact, sway people's opinions when it comes to environmental issues and restoration projects. So we're trying a few different things to get people on board with fisheries restoration.
And I forget exactly what the question was before I started the presentation, but I want to say it was about permitting maybe. I don't know if that person's still here and they want to repeat the question, but essentially we have to go through all the proper permitting channels, and that's going to be a long process, and that's going to ensure that that we've essentially done our due diligence on the project. So that'll be a whole phase. And Eric mentions, how about starting an Ipswich Fish Festival like in Exeter and Plymouth? I'm all for that. I think we should do it. I think more people need to know about the herring and the fish, and what's going on in here. And so I love the work that we do currently, and I definitely think that more people need to know about the cool stuff that's going on in here. So well, with that, we're at 8:20, so definitely past the time by a little bit, but I cannot thank everyone enough for being here, for supporting, for asking questions, and just wanting to stay informed. And I cannot thank Kristen Murphy enough, Amy Singler enough. You guys are so valuable to projects like these, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And so I'll try and respond to people's chats directly after the meeting too. And but with that, feel free to contact me at any time. And I appreciate everyone's time and attention tonight. So have a beer for me at True North, and thank you all who came virtually.